I think it would be difficult to argue that the Nintendo Switch is not one of, if not the best idea for a video game console ever. It is a TV console that you can also play as a handheld. It's the best of both worlds. You no longer really need a handheld console distinct from your regular console because you got the Switch. But I really don't think the Switch has come anywhere close to living up to the potential of this idea, particularly when I think about the history of handhelds, which are fascinating because each handheld console kind of represents taking an older stationary console and making it portable. However, whereas when a new console comes out, it usually represents the height of what that company was able to produce at the time, like the best graphics that were possible to put on an affordable home computer in that period. The portable versions that come later, the technology has advanced considerably. So even though they're trying to, raise the game on sort of a different level, it's like we're creating the best possible thing that we can fit into a handheld. That is not the height of what can be done in that period. And as such, the technology has been so refined from what it was before that the handheld will usually represent a better version than what the original console was capable of. And I think we can see this in a lot of remakes that come to handheld consoles. So for instance, the Game Boy Advance was sort of like a slightly souped up Super Nintendo. And while in that case there were definitely advantages to the Super Nintendo, being a home console, being able to run a lot more images on screen, or being able to just have a bigger screen, not the smaller widescreen layout. Nonetheless, there were a lot of Super Nintendo games re-released on the GBA with a lot of the kinks ironed out and new things added. And this is kind of a trend with each time, we get a console that can handle a handheld that can handle a certain console's level of power, then all the games for that console get remade for that handheld. So I was playing the PSP on an emulator for the first time because I generally, even though I grew up playing GBA, I don't really play a lot of handhelds. I don't go anywhere, so I prefer to just sit at my computer or on a couch and play video games on the TV. But I had hated the PSP for being a big clunky piece of hardware, and I'm not going to take it anywhere. But finally playing it on an emulator, it just made me think, oh wow, this is like the PS1 but better. It's like the graphical capabilities of a PS1, but without the problems the PS1 had, with a lot of kinks ironed out. Again, a lot of PS1 games are remade on PSP and are the definitive versions of those games. I mean, if you go looking for particularly JRPGs, which I'm a big fan of, you will almost always find that PS1 JRPGs had re-releases on the PSP that are just considered better versions. They have more to them, are more fleshed out. And we've continued to see that with each new generation. Like when the DS came out, the very first thing that was on it was Super Mario 64, but with 4 playable characters, and probably fewer glitches overall. So when that console came out, I was like, wow, I have an N64 in my hands. And when the 3DS came out, I was like, wow, I have a Wii in my hands. Well, with the Switch, you got a Switch in your hands. It's a pretty fucking huge upgrade, because the sort of conceit of this console is that it can be competitive with the mainstream consoles, that most games will not push the hardware so hard that they can't be released on it if they're multi-platform in the first place. If they're not trying to push a PS4 or an Xbox One, they can probably survive on the Switch. And that's awesome, but you know what I really want on this thing is all of portable gaming history. Because when I think about the PSP, for instance, I didn't like it because it was portable, and I wanted to play those games on a big screen. But, they're only going to get released for the PSP because they're not seen as full-blown RPG games that have to be played on a monitor, you know? It's like, oh, this isn't a new modern game. This is an old game. It has to be released at a budget cost, you know? It can't be released for modern home consoles because then everybody's going to compare it to what's coming out on the modern home console. And, you know, a lot of these old games work better on a handheld. They don't have as much... We don't have as many super long cutscenes or as many deep action segments. It's better to just plow through it little by little while you're on the bus, I guess. I have never understood playing handhelds because I don't travel. I don't have a commute. I don't really need to have a handheld around. But if I could have taken the PSP and plugged it into a console and played it at home, it would have been great. And there was a thing like that with the Vita, where you could play Vita games on the PS4. There was the PlayStation TV. By the time I even found out about it, I couldn't find it anywhere. I don't know if it still exists, but it was a system to let you play PSP and Vita games on the TV, but the Switch just cuts out all the guesswork. You just plug this fucking thing in and it works. So how does this not have every game ever made on it? That's what I don't understand. This is the ideal console. Anything could be released on this. If you have a handheld series, you can put it on the Switch and treat it like a handheld game and sell it at a reduced cost like it is a handheld game, and people will intuitively understand that that's what you're doing. If you sell a game for $40 on the Switch, we will assume it is a 3DS game. Of course, what's actually been happening is lightly souped up 3DS games have been getting sold for $60 on the Switch, which is quite annoying. The prices are all way too fucking high for all the games on this goddamn thing. And maybe they're just waiting until they have to do it. Like, people are always speculating about Nintendo trying to release like a cheaper version of the Switch or reducing the price, but they don't have to yet. Like, when people stop buying it, when people aren't satisfied with the new games coming out, or when, I think Nintendo can put all their eggs in the Switch basket. I don't know if they're gonna have to upgrade it eventually, when the next console generation comes out, but potentially this console could and should have basically every game ever made from any generation prior on it, because it is the perfect way to play video games. You can play it handheld, you can play it at home, all games make sense on the console. It can have souped up versions of older games that you would love to be able to go back and play, either handheld or on the TV. It just makes sense. Give me all the games.